Hey, how's it going? Today I want to join in a little bit with my contribution for the reading event March on the Rails that is co-hosted by Alan and Alan Reads, Greg at Ghost Readers in the Sky, Andrea at Infinite Text, Debs at Rayner Reads Stuff. I haven't been reading, I haven't been doing the different prompts or reading all through the month. I have read a couple of Westerns that involved trains, but today I want to focus on a mystery short story anthology put out by British Library Crime Classics line, another of the excellent and fun anthologies that Martin Edwards, noted mystery writer himself, he is the kind of editor and consultant, I think, for the British Library Crime Classics line and has done many of these anthologies. I have most of them that he's put out on Kindle. I think I have at least 12, 15 of them. And he collates some hard to find and less hard to find classic murder, mystery, or otherwise crime stories from various collections or periodicals or previously published books, many of them out of print. And so it's a fun and good and easy way to get a hold of some and exposed to some really cool mystery authors and their stories for a cheap price. Especially the Kindles. The Kindle versions are ridiculously cheap, and that's why I tend to buy those, although I would love to get some of the physical copies at some point, and probably will at some stage. Anyway, this particular Crime Classics edition is called Blood on the Tracks. Now, usually Martin Edwards, in these anthologies he does for the British Library Crime Classics line, he picks some kind of topic, whether it's murder mysteries involving animals, or in the classroom, or in Europe, or in the city, or in the country house, etc. He has, or around Christmas, he has several Christmas collections. And similar to the British Library Tales of the Weird anthologies, which are excellent and which I've talked about a few times on this channel in the past, the British Library Crime Classics line has similar curation and choice of cool stories. And I think this particular collection fits perfectly, not only with March Mystery Madness, but also with March on the Rails, this new reading event created just this year. So there are 15 stories in this collection. Each one has an interesting author bio preceding the story, written by Martin Edwards. And of course, he selected these stories. And I read all of them over the course of several days. And I'm going to talk about, not all of them, I'll briefly touch on all of them, but as I go through, but I'll spend a little more time on some of the ones that I particularly enjoyed. So let's get started right on it. The title of the anthology is Blood on the Tracks. It was published in July 2018 and has several cool stories in here. So the first one, it kicks off with an Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Man with the Watches. Now, this is not a Sherlock Holmes story. It's one of Doyle's, non-series, just general crime stories. And it's pretty interesting. It talks about again, many of these in this collection are kind of, or this anthology, are kind of impossible crimes or locked carriage mysteries of that kind. Not all of them, of course, but this one is involving basically older man and a young woman step into a railway carriage. It's watched and no one can come near it, but somehow during the middle of this train trip, the two members that are inside, the two people inside the carriage, seemingly disappear between the starting and destination point, and there's a young man's body left inside the carriage. He has been shot, and people don't know, nobody knows, the police can't figure out where the other people have gotten to, and until someone who was involved in the case sends a letter, quite a bit later, to let the authorities know what happened. It's an interesting crime story, and the main murder itself happens on a train. Then we have The Mystery of Felwyn Tunnel. This is a mystery story written by L.T. Meade, and with the scientist and physician, Dr. Robert Eustace. Robert Eustace was, I believe, a chemist, and often co-wrote mystery novels or stories with other mystery writers in the Golden Age. Most of these are going from the Victorian era up to a few of them into the 50s, I'd say, but most are in the kind of Golden Age murder mystery interwar years between World War I and World War II era, where most of these kinds of tales would come out, and where the detective novel was kind of at its peak, and the detective story. So The Mystery of the Felwyn Tunnel features kind of I guess you could say a debunker, a skeptical debunker of seemingly supernatural events named John Bell. And this is a pretty cool story about signalmen. Of course, there's a famous Charles Dickens horror story, ghost story called The Signalmen, and this probably came out a little bit after that, but it's different in several other respects. Basically, a signalman in this remote shack by this tunnel where this train is coming out winds up dead, like he was trying to clamber up some rocks and fell down. Another man is being held in jail, a rival for the affections of a local barmaid that they are both vying for, and the police first think that it's kind of case of a love triangle gone wrong. But John Bell finds when another signalman subsequently dies, who is out there at the shack, he and the station investigator both spend a night out in this kind of ghostly spot and come very close to losing their own lives when they discover what's really happening. That's a pretty cool story. Then we have a really interesting one called How He Cut His Stick by Matthew MacDonald Bodkin. Now, this is a writer I've never heard of before, never read before. He apparently had several series investigators. He had a male investigator and then the female investigator who's features in this story, and they eventually marry and have a son who also becomes a detective. But the detective in this one is a woman named Dora Myrle, Myrl. She's a very cool character. Basically, the main plot of this one is this bank wants to send a lot of money. They're worried about thieves because the person that is the courier for this money has to be, someone who can handle himself. And so they hire the biggest, strongest, fiercest looking guy from their office, a clerk in their office, to take the funds up. But this man ends up being chloroformed and the money stolen. And he is under suspicion because they think there's no one in the train car. The carriage was empty. How could anyone have got in there to do what this man said happened? And so Dora Myrle is hired to investigate because the president of the company is quite sure this man is innocent but can't really prove it. And so he asks her to investigate, and she kind of retraces the route with him and figures out what really happened. There's a kind of fun bicycle chase at the end where she helps this kind of falsely accused man apprehend the real culprit. That's a fun story. Then we have The Affair of the Corridor Express by Victor L. Whitechurch. And the detective in this one is called Thorpe Hazel. I've never read this author or this detective before either. Hazel is an interesting guy. Again, around this time when Sherlock Holmes was at his peak, the Sherlock Holmes stories by Arthur Conan Doyle were very, very popular in the Strand magazine, and many other writers took their own chance to have detectives out. And there were a couple of books put out years ago called The Rivals of Sherlock Holmes that featured a lot of these other kind of rival detectives to Holmes. Several of them are in this volume, and this is another one, I guess. But he's not exactly like Holmes. He's more eccentric, if you could even believe such a thing. He's kind of an early fitness guru who does his weird eye exercises and things while he's interviewing clients. And Hazel helps this young kind of schoolmaster at this boys' school, and there's a very wealthy man's son that was in his charge when he was taking him to the train under a false pretense, as it turns out, to go back and meet his father. And this young man is kidnapped on the train right in kind of near this schoolmaster's purview, right next, somewhere off the train, and he's spirited off the train. The police search the train and can't find where this boy is, and Hazel figures out where he is and is able to help rescue the boy and save the reputation of the school where he was attending. And then we have the case. This is a really good one. This is the longest work in the collection. This is the Case of Oscar Brodsky by R. Austin Freeman. This is a Dr. Thorndike mystery story. Now, Dr. Thorndike is probably one of the most popular of the rivals of Sherlock Holmes. He is more of a scientific detective than Holmes. He does do intuition and things, but he focuses really heavily on forensic clues. Again, at the time, that would be quite novel. And he's not affiliated with the police, but he does assist them when he can. And he has his own kind of Watson called Dr. Jervis, and who assists him and is always marveling at his acumen for finding these little forensic details. And the fun thing about Thorndike is he carries, at least in this story anyway, he carries this little kind of chemical investigation case with him. Looks like a little miniature. He has a little miniature microscope and lots of little vials and test tubes and slides and chemicals, and he carries it with him because he never knows when he might be called on to investigate. And this is an interesting story. It's longer, like I mentioned, and it starts with the murder. We are in the we learn about this murderer, and we know who the murderer is. There's no mystery about how the crime was committed or who did the crime, but this is more of a how catch 'em, kind of like a Columbo, I guess, although there's no confrontation between Dr. Thorndike and the killer. But this is a man who's kind of a jewel. He's a crook, but he hasn't really turned to murder, but he finds the opportunity too much to resist when a man on the way to the train station, kind of nearsighted guy, he doesn't recognize the man whose house he stops at to ask directions, but the killer, or the eventual killer, does recognize this guy from his criminal activities in the past as a diamond merchant, and he knows that he's often carrying a lot of expensive diamonds on his person, and he can tell this guy has at least 5,000 pounds of diamonds on him, if not even more. And he just can't resist. It's quite an interesting way it's written that he starts to, he wants to part of him wants to not murder and get away from this guy before he does anything, but he falls prey to his greed, and he ends up messily killing this guy and trying to dispose of his body on the tracks. And if it wasn't for Dr. Thorndike being around, he probably would have gotten away with it. But unfortunately for him, Dr. Thorndike is on the scene, and his friend asks him to investigate. And despite the local police detective kind of rolling his eyes at all the strange things that it seems like Dr. Thorndike is doing, like examining all the little pieces of glass that fell off of the dead man's spectacles, is basically the train tries to stop. The killer had laid the body on the tracks, and the train rolls over and decapitates him and crumples up his body. It's pretty gruesome there. But Thorndike finds many clues that point him to where the house of the killer is, the kind of remote house where it has to be the closest location. He and the police go into the house and find all sorts of further clues. This is, I guess, before kind of rules of breaking and entering as a police officer to without a warrant. But anyway, they end up getting the guy through Thorndike's scientific legerdemain. Quite a fun story in the two parts there. You have the kind of suspense of how the killer is going to try to get away with it and burn the man's hat and erase any signs of the murder. And then you have, the detective from his point of view, how he's going to, find the clues to put the noose around this guy's neck. Very, very cool story. Okay. After that, we have a non-detective story. We have a couple in this book that are just straight up crime stories, kind of tales of murder and how crime does not pay, I guess you could say. The next is The Eighth Lamp by Roy Vickers. And this is one about a man who's, as it turns out, has killed another guy because he coveted his his wife, I guess, and they've shacked up, but the man is kind of regretting his deed and feeling haunted by the dead man who he stashed away in this tunnel. He works for the train yards, and he kind of had volunteered for extra pay to man the station, the kind of signal box at night, and his nerves are getting to him and what eventually happens after that. It was a pretty cool story, but I prefer ones with detectives in them, of course. Then we have, speaking of detectives, we get back to another very famous one that was a rival of Sherlock Holmes, or pretty famous. This is The Knight's Cross Signal Problem by Ernest Bramah, featuring his blind detective Max Carados. Max Carados, a really cool character. I think there's at least 2 or 3 collections of stories written about him. And he has a kind of a guy who works for the government that consults him upon occasion, and he's one of those characters in fiction anyway that are blind but have all their other senses extremely heightened, and he can pull off all sorts of almost magical feats of intuition and detection. And a different story, not this one where he is kidnapped, was dramatized for the rivals of Sherlock Holmes ITV TV series, or Granada TV series, back in the 70s with Robert Stevens, the man who played Sherlock Holmes in The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, the movie directed by Billy Wilder back in the 70s. Robert Stevens plays, in this TV series, plays Max Carados, and it's a wonderful episode, and he's a wonderful actor. Anyway, this is a fun story, kind of interesting, kind of basically a train conductor, or train driver, I guess, engineer, whatever you want to call him, is in an accident where he is given the signal that clearly says go ahead. He goes ahead and he ends up ramming into another train. Many passengers are killed and injured as a result, and he's beside himself because he knows he followed the rules, he didn't do anything wrong, but blame is kind of being cast on him, and eventually Max Carados figures out what really happened. Good story, not fantastic, but good. Then we have a really fun and beautifully written one by Dorothy L. Sayers, featuring her lead detective, Lord Peter Wimsey, and it's called The Unsolved Puzzle of the Man with No Face. This is a very cool kind of impossible crime story. Now, the crime doesn't occur on the train, but the story starts off at length on the train, and it's talking about how it's a very hot day and it's very crowded, and so a lot of people who shouldn't be in the first class cabin traditionally. A little bit of Dorothy L. Sayers snobbishness kind of creeps in here, but anyway, her character, Lord Peter Wimsey, is not a snob, much to his credit. Anyway, he's in this first class coach. He's not named. He's the first class passenger. He's not named for a large chunk of this story, and a bunch of other people crowd in because they're on their way from the seaside or whatever, and they're all talking about this body that has been found on the beach, and the man has been all cut up around the face. Can't recognize his face, but and there's only his set of footprints leading on the sand to the sea, and no other footprints. How was he murdered? How did he get there? And while they're talking about it, eventually Lord Peter Wimsey, the first class passenger, starts giving his idea of what happened. But in the car with all these different passengers who eventually get out, they're go on their separate ways after having discussed this and listened to Wimsey's kind of spiel of what he thinks happened. And one of the passengers on the train is a police inspector who's investigating the case, and he kind of he asks for some help from Lord Peter Wimsey because he knows who he is and his reputation as a crime solver. And what happens after that? They identify the man who was murdered. Sounds like he was a real nasty piece of work, and the possible suspect. But how things turn out is interesting, and maybe not justice in the traditional police way is served, but perhaps justice in the moral way is served in this story. Anyway, it's a really fun, nimbly written, clever story, and I really enjoyed reading it. It's probably one of the most kind of sharply written prose of all the stories in this this book, among a couple others here. Speaking of the very next one, which is also a fantastic story. It's called The Railway Carriage by a woman named F. Tennyson Jesse. I think her name was Winifred, and she changed it to, kind of Fred Tennyson Jesse. She basically, like many women at the time who were writing these kind of stories, they kind of did initials, so they came across as a male writer, perhaps to get more ease of being published until their reputation was made, similar to L.T. Meade before. Anyway, F. Tennyson Jesse wrote several different kind of stories, but this is a story featuring her female sleuth, who's also kind of an occult investigator, or she has kind of a sensitive vibes where she can tell when evil is present, etc. I'd really like to get a hold of her collection of stories featuring her, Solange Fontaine. But this one is a really excellent story. Basically, she's on the train, and there are two passengers. Solange Fontaine is on the train. She's returning from just having wrapped up another case successfully. It's implied. And she gets on this train carriage, and there's another woman in the carriage who who doesn't want to make eye contact, doesn't talk, an older woman, but looks, like something has upset her, and she's kind of keeping to herself. And then another man gets in the train holding a little case, a little leather satchel, and something seems odd or off about him, although he's polite enough. Solange wants a light for her. She asks the old woman, "Do you mind if I smoke?" And the old woman says, "No, go ahead." And then, but she doesn't have a match, so she asks this new arrival if she can have a match, and he lights a light, and he lights her cigarette for her. But she gets, especially with the two in there, she gets a real weird, queer, uncomfortable feeling. So while she's on the train, Solange is relieved because she feels uncomfortable with these two people being the only ones in the carriage, and she's just like, I need to get out of this carriage, but there's nowhere else to go. And then a bunch of other travelers come in, and she feels a relief that there's some other people here, and they start talking about an execution, that a man was executed for supposedly coming up behind a rival, a hated person, and slitting his throat or whatever, or strangling him. I forgot the exact way he killed him, but that man was put to death that very day. So that's crucial information, of course. And then the others get off, and they're continuing on down to London, and much to Solange's dismay, these same two passengers, the older woman and the man with the case in his hand, are still there, and she feels uncomfortable. And all of a sudden, there is a sudden surprise derailment. The train crashes, kind of arching, the cars are going everywhere, and there's chaos and fire and everything. And she and the other two passengers are trapped in this train. Solange comes awake, and she hears someone saying, "Get up, you got to get up." And she's like dimly waking up, and she looks up, and she sees this young man peering down at her from the carriage door, but it's the car is, at a weird angle, and it's way up there, and how's she going to get out? And he says, "You have to wake up the man next to you." And then so she wakes up the guy with the bag and says, "You got to climb up there." And so the guy, once he kind of gets his bearings, she's getting more and more panicky, Solange is, because she can hear the fire coming and stuff and crackling. And she sees the young man occasionally looking up, peering down, saying, "You got to hurry up, fire's coming." And listen, and she hears the crackling of the flames nearing, and it's getting panic time. And finally, the man who is sharing the carriage with her climbs up, and she said, "Get a rope. I need to get out of here. And he says, come on up," because she's young and fit, Solange is. She could probably get out, but she says, "No, I can't leave the old woman here. I got to get her out of here." So he says, "Okay, open my bag." And she opens his bag and takes out a rope out of his bag. And now with the coldness, she realizes this is his hangman's rope. And this gentleman in the car with her is the executioner that put to death the young man. And the woman who's still in the carriage that Solange has to rescue is the mother of the executed man. And she still sees the man, the younger guy up there saying, come on, you got to hurry up. And get her out, put the rope around her, etc. So anyway, they succeed to getting, everyone gets out, and she's like, oh my God, I'm so glad to have the fresh air. And then she looks around and she sees the young man leaning over the older woman and whispering to her. And then she says to the executioner, where's the young man that was helping? And he says, there's no young man. I didn't see the young man. And of course, it's the ghost of the young man who was put to death, the executed man. And that's, this is the only story in here that's actually kind of goes into the full supernatural. And that's really cool and a very fun story. I'd like to read more stories by her. She's an interesting character, and the writer is really good. She does a really good job describing the situation and dialogue, etc. F. Tennyson Jesse is her name, and this is The Railway Carriage. Okay, a couple more. We have The Mystery of the Slip Coach by Sapper, H.C. McNeil. Sapper is responsible for creating the character of Bulldog Drummond, kind of a thriller writer a la Edgar Wallace. He also had a secondary character who appeared in several of the Bulldog Drummond novels called Ronald Standish, who is a detective who probably got involved assisting Bulldog Drummond in some of those novels. But in this one, there's no Bulldog Drummond, it's just Ronald Standish. And this is another murder on a train car. How did it happen? The windows are shut. The door was shut of the carriage. A man has been shot through the head. And there is an egg, basically egg yolk and white and shell all around the door and around the carriage. And the police inspector who's investigating is like, who cares about this egg? We got to find out where the gun is and all this stuff. But of course, Ronald Standish knows the egg is very crucial, and it will explain the crime, the supposed possible crime. Then we have The Level Crossing by Freeman Wills Crofts, who was more well known for writing detective novels, kind of humdrum novels, as they're so called, humdrum meaning mystery novels with intricate plots that are worked out with careful precision and planning, but might be a little dull to some people's point of view. Freeman Wills Crofts is interesting because he was a train expert. He worked on the train lines as an engineer and built some bridges and tunnels, etc. And he knows railways very well, and his trains often featured in his mystery novels. And this one is another crime story. It's not, there's no detective in this one. And this is one about a man who had stolen some money from his company, kind of embezzled a small amount, and because he was looking to marry a beautiful but aristocratic lady who is now demanding a life of, high standards that he's trying to keep up with, but his cooking the books is discovered by another older weaselly gentleman who is blackmailing him, and he decides he's got to get rid of this guy, and he's figured out a way to murder him in using a train by getting him on the train tracks. But at the last minute, he decides he doesn't want to do it. But what happens despite his attempts at not committing the crime? It's an interesting little story. And finally, we have 3 more stories to finish up the volume. We have one by Ronald Knox, The Adventure of the First Class Carriage. This is a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. Now, Ronald Knox is one of the founding members of the Detection Club. He came up with, I believe it's the Decalogue, the 10 rules of detective fiction that were published, fair play, murder, mystery, detective rules for mystery novels back in the day of the Detection Club in the Golden Age. And he is half joking. He wasn't necessarily, slavish about this. And of course, a lot of great mystery writers had a lot of fun breaking and bending these rules subsequently, including Agatha Christie. Now, this one is not, there's no real crime part set on the train. There is a crucial element to the mystery that's set on the train. Basically, Holmes and Watson are approached by seemingly a domestic, a woman who works, her and her husband supposedly have been hired by a strange, childless older couple, and something strange is going on, and it seems like the man and wife are always fighting, and the man has talked about suicide, and so Holmes and Watson kind of take the same train as this man, and they're finding little notes being flogged, little pieces of ripped paper of suicide notes kind of being thrown out of the carriage. Holmes and Watson are in the carriage behind it, and so it's coming back towards them. And of course, Holmes sees through what's really happening in this case. It's all right. It's an okay story. Again, I always prefer actual Sherlock Holmes stories more than pastiches, but it was well enough done. Then we have a short and interesting, but eventually kind of inconsequential little murder mystery story. The Murder on the 716 by Michael Innes. This is featuring his detective, Sir John Appleby, who I think was a chief inspector and rose up to being superintendent. Michael Innes was a real academic, and this is one of his more approachable stories, I guess. But this is interesting because it's a murder set on a mock-up train, a train that's on a movie set, a film set. And the producer of the movie finds this writer of the movie they're working on murdered. His head's been bashed in this mock-up train, the 716. It's kind of patterned after and the story is too of a famous train where there had been an accident or a crime on this train, and they're making a movie about that. But then there's the writer is actually killed on this set, and Sir John Appleby is called in to investigate. It's an interesting little clever story, but again, it's short and doesn't pack a full punch like some of these others. And finally, another crime writer named Michael, who's not famous, not a household name, but he's well respected in the industry, or he was. His name is Michael Gilbert, and this is a Patrick Petrella story. He didn't have many series characters that were in novels or anything, unlike a lot of these other writers, so that's maybe why he's not as well known today. But he did have some characters, and one was a policeman named Patrick Petrella, London policeman, and this is called the Coleman Handicap. And again, this is not really, it's the train element is kind of peripheral to the story, but there is a lot of going off and on trains. Basically, there's a German woman who's suspected by top brass at Scotland Yard of being kind of a fence or kind of a courier of stolen goods, stolen gems and diamonds and the like for other criminals, other jewel thieves. And they are onto her, but they need to nail her and who she is passing the jewels off to. And she's so shrewd. She used to be in the German underground resistance in Germany during World War II. This is one of the few stories that's set later. I believe it's set in the 50s, possibly 60s. And, she's very, very sharp. And so the first attempt where Petrella tries to, with many other policemen, to try to follow her, to see where she goes. She seems to have disappeared when she goes into this bar, and they never see her come out, but she's not there when they go in. There's another woman who kind of looks like her, but it's not her. And Petrella has egg on his face, and he has some ideas of how to proceed from here. And he and a smaller team get the go-ahead to try to get to the bottom of, how this woman disappeared and how they can catch her in the act, so to speak, and find out who is her contact to pass on this stolen jewelry to. And this is a fun story. It's also a longer one and is very well written and smooth. And Petrella is an interesting character, but it's not, he's not one of the typical Golden Age eccentric amateur sleuths like a Lord Peter Wimsey or Max Carados or whatever. But it was a good, slightly more modern story to close out the volume. So all of those involve trains in some ways. I enjoyed almost all the stories to varying degrees, and several of them I enjoyed very, very much. So that is Blood on the Tracks, edited by Martin Edwards and published by the British Library Crime Classics line. Again, this is my contribution to the event, the BookTube event, March on the Rails. And I wanted to chime in where I could. In my monthly reading wrap-up for March, I'll talk about the the couple of the westerns that I read that had something to do with trains also, that will also kind of fit in with this event. But the predominant one I want to focus on for this is this story anthology. Thanks as always for watching. We'll catch you in another video real soon. Take care and happy reading.